I thought it was an ordinary Tuesday evening. The sky had started to turn a light shade of orange, and I decided to take a shortcut through the alley behind the local grocery store on my way home from work. Walking past the store's back door, I noticed a grocery cart, seemingly abandoned against the wall. It was filled with what I first thought was a bunch of discarded clothes, but as I got closer, I knew something wasn't right. Peeking out from the pile of clothing was a human foot. My heart raced and I froze on the spot. I moved closer, thinking it might be a prank or doll, but the terrible stench that filled my nose told me otherwise. My hands trembling, I reached out and carefully shifted some of the clothes aside. What I saw next will haunt me forever. There, lying amidst the tattered clothes, was a lifeless body of a man. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly upwards, and his pale skin contrasted sharply with the dark pool of blood that had formed beneath him. The cut on his throat was deep, almost surgical. My mind raced. Who could have done this? Was it a random act or something more sinister? The back door of the store was ajar. Could someone inside the store be involved? I wanted to scream, to run, to call the police, but my body wouldn't let me. Then I heard a noise, the unmistakable creak of the door slowly opening. I turned my gaze towards the store's back entrance. The silhouette of a tall figure emerged from the darkness, holding something that gleamed in the dimming light. I didn't wait any longer. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, not daring to look back. All the while, the image of that lifeless body, the deep gash on his throat, and the mysterious figure haunted my thoughts. I made it home, but I didn't feel safe. It took me a while to gather the courage to call the police. By the time they reached the spot, both the body and the cart were gone. They took my statement, but couldn't find any evidence or any clues about what had happened. Now, every time I pass a grocery store or see a stray cart, that horrifying memory floods back, and I'm reminded of that evening. I'm a ranger, and I've seen all kinds of things, but what I stumbled upon that cold, foggy night was something no amount of experience could prepare me for. The campfire was still smoldering when I found it. Tents torn apart, belongings scattered, but it was the blood that caught my eye. So much blood. It was spattered across the ground, the leaves, the tents. I could almost hear the screams that must have filled the air. My heart pounded in my chest. Fear crept up my spine. I thought back to the brutal murder that had happened only a month ago in a neighboring campground. A family of 4 that was missing, their campground found covered in blood. They never caught who did it. Was this the work of the same hand? The silence of the forest was a haunting melody. Every rustle of the wind was a whisper of danger. I fumbled for my radio but stopped. What if they were still nearby? What if they heard me? I needed to leave. I needed to get help. But my legs were heavy, and my mind was a whirlwind of terror. The murderer was out there, and they could be watching me. As I stumbled back towards my truck, I felt eyes on me. The darkness seemed to close in, the shadows twisting into sinister shapes. My breath came in ragged gasps. It was just a trick of the mind, I told myself, just the wind and the trees. But as I reached the safety of my vehicle, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror at the shrinking outline of the dark forest. But in my mind, the bloody campsite remained, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the nightmare was far from over. The killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next victim, waiting for me. I've always loved the comforting predictability of living in a small town, every day the same. Until today, when I was walking home from work, I was suddenly struck with the sensation of being watched. Across the road, a man sat inside a gray sedan, smoking and staring directly at me. A shiver went down my spine. I picked up my pace, trying to shake off the unease. But the car started, and it began to trail me. Panic bubbled inside. I quickly turned onto Maple Street, praying he'd lose interest. But it kept following. Cursing myself for leaving my phone at home, I looked around for an escape. There was an alleyway up ahead, and it beckoned. I darted into the shadows, hiding behind a dumpster. I barely breathed as the headlights swept over the alley before continuing on. Believing he was gone, I made my way towards the wood that led straight home. As I entered the tree line, a chilling hand covered my mouth, and a raspy voice whispered, "Don't scream." It was him. My heart raced, fear threatened to immobilize me. But a memory from an old self-defense class kicked in. Using all my might, I stamped on his foot and I elbowed his stomach. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough, and I broke free. I ran blindly through the woods, the sound of his pursuit close behind. Yet I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Veering left, I reached a familiar creek that streamed directly into my backyard. Emerging from the woods, the lights of my house beckoned. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, and then called the police. They arrived swiftly, apprehending the man who, as I later learned, was linked to numerous unsolved abductions. My escape had not only saved me, but had brought a monster to justice. The incident shook my sense of security, but it also revealed a strength I never knew I had. The whirring of the machines filled the laundromat, the rhythmic hum luring me into a sort of trance. Most of the dryers and washers were occupied, except for a few. I needed to transfer my clothes from the washer to the dryer, hoping to get out of there before it got too late. I opened the lid of the nearest available dryer to ensure it was empty before loading my clothes. But what I saw wasn't the gleaming metal drum I was expecting. Instead, I was met with the pale, lifeless face of a man, his eyes wide in terror. I gasped, recoiling instantly, a scream threatening to break free. Blood seemed to paint the entirety of the dryer's interior, seeping into the vents and coating the drum. His body was twisted unnaturally, limbs contorted to fit the confined space. It looked like he had been folded. I backed away, my breathing erratic. Panic surged through me. The laundromat was quiet except for the dull drone of the machines, a stark contrast to the horror I'd just uncovered. I needed to tell someone, to scream for help, but my voice was stuck, and my legs felt rooted to the spot. As I forced my eyes away from the gruesome sight, I caught a fleeting movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow darted behind one of the washing machines, a low chuckle echoing from the darkness. The realization struck me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't alone, and whoever, or whatever was there with me, might have been responsible for the body. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, urging me to flee. I made a beeline to the exit, the sound of footsteps echoing mine, growing louder and more menacing. The glass door was mere feet away when a cold hand clamped down on my shoulder. I didn't dare look back. With a surge of strength, I shrugged it off and crashed through the door into the safety of the night. The cold air stung my face, but I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. Even as I drove away, the image of the bloody body and the chilling laughter haunted my every thought. The laundromat's lights soon faded into my rearview mirror, but the nightmares of that night were just beginning. I was fixing up my backyard one chilly autumn day. The air felt heavy with fallen leaves, and the sun barely peeked through the gray clouds. My garden was a mess, overgrown like a jungle. I grabbed a shovel and started digging near the big oak tree, wanting to clean up the place. Thunk. My shovel hit something hard. I wiped sweat from my forehead and squatted down to see what I'd struck. When I saw that bony white thing staring back at me, my heart stopped for a moment. It was a skull. Human. Empty sockets that seemed to stare right through me. I dropped the shovel, my mind racing. This wasn't some Halloween prank. It was way too real. Panic set in, and I called the cops. As I waited, I couldn't help but remember the old missing persons case that had haunted our town. Years back, a girl named Emily had disappeared without a trace. Posters with her face were all over town. The police had searched high and low, but she was just gone. It was like she'd been swallowed up by the earth. And now, staring at that skull, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled upon the answer that everyone had been looking for. The police arrived, and as they dug, the memories of Emily's case flooded my mind. She used to love that oak tree, always hanging out there, writing in her journal. It was like a part of her life story, and now it was tangled up in the gruesome mess. Bits and pieces started emerging from the dirt. Bones, shreds of clothes, even a necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. It was like piecing together a nightmare. The more they found, the more it became clear that Emily hadn't just run away. Someone had done something terrible to her. News spread fast, and the whole town buzzed with a mix of shock and dread. Friends and family of Emily had waited years for answers, and now they were getting more than they bargained for. The person responsible for this horror had been somewhere among us, maybe even smiling and pretending all this time. Months passed, and the cops worked their tails off. It was like a puzzle coming together, piece by piece. They finally pinned it on a guy who had known Emily. An old acquaintance turned out to be a sick, twisted killer. It was a relief to know he was off the streets, but it didn't change the fact that our town would always carry the weight of what had happened. As I stand here now, looking at that oak tree, I can't shake the chills. The sun doesn't feel warm anymore, and the shadows feel different. The mystery of Emily's disappearance had been solved, but it was a nightmare we couldn't forget. The backyard, once a sanctuary, was now a graveyard of secrets.